Imagine standing at the base of a living cathedral, a tree so massive, so incomprehensibly ancient, that your brain refuses to process it as real. 3,000 years old. Taller than a 25-story building, a trunk so thick that 8 grown men holding hands couldn't encircle it. Now picture 2 tiny figures standing before this giant. In their hands, a 5-meter saw, their mission, to bring it down. This is the absurd war between man and nature that played out in California's Sierra Nevada forests at the turn of the 20th century. And here's where it gets strange. In 1875, it took loggers 9 full days to fell a single giant sequoia. In 1892, another crew needed 13 days for one tree. Yet somehow, by the early 1900s, experienced teams claimed they could drop these monsters in just 8 hours. 8 hours. To saw through a tree trunk 8 meters wide, with nothing but a hand saw and raw human muscle. How is that even possible? What changed? What brutal innovations? What desperate techniques? What insane risks did these men take to achieve the impossible? And here's the darker question lurking beneath. Why did they call their tool the misery whip, not the efficiency saw or the timber master? Misery whip, a name that promised suffering, a name that hinted at something far worse than simple hard work. The tool of torture had a nickname for a reason, and the men who wielded it, they paid a price that makes your modern 8-hour desk job look like paradise. Let's step into their world. Let's feel the weight of that saw in our hands. Let's understand what it really meant to wage war against a god. The misery whip wasn't just a saw, it was a relationship destroyer, a friendship killer, a device so brutally demanding that logging camps had a saying: "This saw creates more enemies from friends than anything else in the woods." Let's break down why. Picture a blade stretching 5 meters from end to end. 16 feet of tempered steel weighing around 5 kilograms. Teeth on both edges, each one hand-filed to razor sharpness. One side cuts on the pull, the other on the push. Sounds efficient, right? Wrong. Here's the cruel genius of the design. 2 men, one on each end. They're not just sawing together, they're performing a synchronized dance, where a single misstep means disaster. You pull, your partner pulls, back and forth, thousands of times. But here's the catch. You can never, ever push. The moment you push instead of pull, the saw binds in the cut. The blade bends. Sometimes it snaps. $50 worth of steel, ruined because you got tired and forgot the rhythm for 1 second. And your partner. He feels it instantly. That slight resistance. That betrayal of trust. That moment when he realizes you're not pulling your weight. Now do this for 8 hours straight. Feel your forearms burning, your shoulders screaming, your back cramping, and the entire time you're locked in this intimate partnership with another exhausted man who's feeling exactly the same pain, exactly the same temptation to cheat, to push instead of pull. Arguments erupted. Fistfights broke out. Men who'd been friends for years stopped speaking because of what happened during a day on the misery whip. One logger wrote in his diary, "I'd rather spend a week in hell than another day on that damn saw with Peterson. We nearly killed each other over 3 inches of kerf." But the torture didn't end when the sawing stopped. Every single day, someone had to sharpen the teeth, not a quick pass with a file. We're talking hours of meticulous work, filing each individual tooth to the exact same angle, the exact same depth. Get it wrong and the saw pulls to one side, making your partner work twice as hard. Some days, bad days, the entire shift was spent just sharpening. No cutting, no progress, just endless filing while your quota slipped further out of reach. And then there was the nightly ritual. As darkness fell over the logging camp, you'd see men carrying their saws to the fire. Not to warm themselves. To dry the blades. Sequoia wood is dense with moisture. Leave your saw damp overnight and you'd wake up to rust creeping across the steel, or worse, a warped blade from uneven drying. The saw had to sleep by the fire like a temperamental child. This wasn't a tool. It was a tyrant. It demanded perfect synchronization, endless maintenance, and absolute dedication. It punished mistakes instantly and forgave nothing, and we haven't even gotten to the truly insane part yet. Because using the misery whip was only half the battle. First, you had to get it into position, and that meant climbing into the sky. Here's a problem. You're standing at the base of a sequoia. The trunk is 8 meters wide at ground level, swollen with age, buttressed with thick bark, often rotted at the base from centuries of standing in damp soil. If you try to cut there, you'll be sawing for weeks through the widest, hardest parts of the tree. So you don't cut at the bottom. You cut higher up, much higher up. Enter the springboard, a wooden plank roughly 6 feet long and a foot wide. Sturdy enough to hold a man. Narrow enough to wedge into a slot carved into the tree trunk. And here's where it gets terrifying. You're going to stand on this plank, 4 to 6 meters above the ground, with no harness, no safety rope, no net below. Just you, a shaky board, and gravity waiting patiently for you to make a mistake. Watch how it's done. The faller climbs the tree first, axe in hand. He's looking for the sweet spot, that height where the trunk narrows enough to save hours of sawing but hasn't yet branched out into chaos. He chooses his spot. Then he starts chopping. Not cutting the tree down, not yet. He's carving a horizontal slot into the trunk, angled slightly upward, a pocket for the springboard. Chop, chop, chop. Wood chips rain down. His arms are already tired and the real work hasn't even started. He slides the board into the slot, tests it with his weight. If it holds, he climbs onto it. If it doesn't, he falls. Simple as that. No second chances at 20 feet up. Now he's standing on one springboard. But the tree is 8 meters wide, remember. His partner needs to be on the opposite side. So the process repeats. Another climb, another carved slot, another precarious board jutting out from the trunk like a diving board over concrete. 2 men. 2 springboards, separated by the massive diameter of an ancient tree. They can barely see each other. They definitely can't talk easily. Hand signals and shouted commands through dense wood and empty air. And now, here's the question that should be keeping you up at night. How do you coordinate sawing when you're standing on opposite sides of a tree that's wider than a small house? How do you maintain that perfect pull-pull rhythm when you can't see your partner's face, can't read his fatigue, can't tell if he's about to slip? You feel it. Through the saw, every tremor, every hesitation, the blade becomes your only communication device, a telegraph made of steel, transmitting exhaustion and determination in equal measure. But wait, there's more danger we haven't even mentioned yet. You're up there on your narrow plank, pulling a 5-meter saw back and forth with all your strength. The tree is still alive, still swaying slightly in the wind. Branches above you, some dead, some dying, all of them potential missiles. A gust of wind hits. A branch breaks loose. You hear it cracking, falling. Do you jump? Do you freeze? You're 20 feet up on a board barely wider than your boots. Loggers died this way. Fell from springboards when their platform split under the constant vibration of sawing. Fell when they dodged a falling branch and lost their balance. Fell when exhaustion made them careless for just 1 second. The forest floor below, littered with stumps, rocks, and the jagged remains of previously felled trees. Landing meant broken bones at best. Death at worst. And you're doing this for 8 hours. 8 hours of standing on a wobbling plank, sawing through wood harder than oak, in a position that makes every muscle in your body scream for mercy. The misery whip earned its name on the ground, but up on those springboards, it became a death sentence wrapped in a daily wage. So why did they do it? Why risk everything for trees that, as we're about to discover, were almost worthless once they hit the ground? Here's the cosmic joke. The giant sequoia is the largest tree on Earth, the most massive living organism on the planet. A single tree can contain enough wood to build dozens of houses. The logging companies looked at these titans and saw dollar signs stretching to the horizon. They saw wrong, because sequoia wood, for all its size, for all its ancient grandeur, is terrible lumber, absolutely terrible. And nobody realized this until after they'd invested fortunes in equipment, crews, and infrastructure. Let's walk through what happened when a sequoia finally fell. You've spent 8 hours, maybe 13 days, sawing through the trunk. Your arms are destroyed. Your partnership is hanging by a thread. The tree starts to lean. Gravity takes over. 3,000 years of vertical existence ends in seconds. The impact is catastrophic. When a sequoia hits the ground, it doesn't land like normal timber. It explodes. The wood is so brittle, so filled with internal stresses from millennia of growth, that the shock of landing shatters it like glass. Imagine dropping a 200-ton crystal vase from a 30-story building. That's what happens. 25 to 50% of the tree is instantly destroyed, just gone. Splintered into kindling, hundreds of tons of ancient wood reduced to useless fragments in the span of a heartbeat. But it gets worse. The trees that were too big, the real giants measuring over 8 feet in diameter, couldn't even be processed whole. They had to be broken down first. And how do you break down a fallen sequoia, too massive to move? You blow it up, black powder, packed into drilled holes along the trunk. The loggers would light the fuse, run for cover, and watch as explosions ripped the ancient tree into manageable chunks. Manageable, but ruined. Each blast destroyed another 80% of usable wood. Between the fall and the explosions, you were lucky to salvage 15% of the original tree. Do the math. A sequoia might contain enough wood for 40 houses. By the time it hit the ground and got blasted apart, you had enough quality lumber for maybe 6. Maybe. The logging companies were hemorrhaging money, crews of 15 to 20 men working for months on a single grove, massive investments in specialized equipment, rail lines built deep into the forest to haul out the timber, and the profit margin, razor thin. Sometimes negative. Companies went bankrupt. Investors lost everything. The Hume Bennett Lumber Company, one of the largest operators, spent 10 years destroying 8,000 giant sequoias in Converse Basin. Historians would later call it the greatest orgy of destructive lumbering in the history of the world. And even they barely broke even. So why continue? Why keep felling these magnificent, unprofitable trees? Greed, yes, but also something darker. Ego. The desire to prove it could be done. The need to showcase these giants to a world that didn't believe trees could grow so large. Companies felled sequoias specifically to display at world's fairs. They wanted the prestige, the publicity, the chance to say, we conquered nature itself. The General Noble tree, cut in 1892, was dismantled and shipped to the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Not for lumber, for spectacle. Visitors stood inside the hollow section and refused to believe it was real. They thought it was a hoax, an elaborate construction. The idea that a tree could be that enormous seemed like a fairy tale. Thousands of years of growth, months of back-breaking labor, lives lost, and fortunes spent. And for what? So city dwellers could gawk at a museum exhibit and call it fake. The only people who actually made money from sequoias were the small operators. The scavengers who bought up the shattered remains after the big companies moved on. They turned 3,000-year-old giants into fence posts, roof shingles, grape stakes for vineyards. Imagine that, a tree that was a sapling when Rome was founded, that survived ice ages and droughts and lightning strikes for 3 millennia. Reduced to stakes for holding up grapevines. But none of this stopped the cutting. Because there was always another tree, another challenge, another chance to dance with death on a springboard 20 feet in the air. And the men who did this work? They paid a price that made bankruptcy look merciful. Let's talk about what your life looked like as a sequoia logger in 1900. You wake up before dawn in a bunkhouse that smells like sweat, wet wool, and kerosene. 11 hours of work ahead of you, 6 days a week. Your pay, $1.50 to $2.50 per day. Sounds reasonable until you realize the company deducts room and board. That bunk you're sleeping in costs you. The watery stew you'll eat tonight costs you. By the end of the week, you might clear $5 if you're lucky. You walk to the cutting site in darkness. Your hands are already aching from yesterday. The misery whip waits for you like an old enemy. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you know the statistics. You know that logging is the most dangerous job in America. You know that men die here, regularly, brutally. Steel cables snap under tension and whip through the air like guillotines, cutting men in half. Logs roll unexpectedly during transport, crushing anyone in their path. The timber chutes, those long wooden slides built to send logs down mountainsides, collapse without warning, sending tons of wood and several workers tumbling hundreds of feet. There's no workers' compensation, not until 1913. Get injured and you're done. The company might have a medical tent, might have some whiskey and bandages. Might. If you're lucky, there's a doctor in the nearest town, 20 miles away over rough terrain. If you're not lucky, your partners bury you in the woods and move on to the next tree. Let me give you a specific example. The General Noble tree, 1892. We mentioned it earlier for the World's Fair. But here's what we didn't tell you about the felling. The crew had built scaffolding around the tree, platforms and supports to help guide the fall and process the wood afterward. Standard procedure for the really big ones. The sawing took days. Finally, the tree began to lean. The men scrambled for safety. Everything was going according to plan. And then the tree didn't fall cleanly. It twisted as it went down. The scaffolding, all that carefully built infrastructure, exploded. Wood and metal flying in every direction. 2 workers found themselves directly in the impact zone as the massive trunk hit the ground. The vibration alone was enough to knock them off their feet. They went down flat on the stump, the actual stump of the fallen tree. Arms wrapped around it. Legs gripping like they were hugging a giant child. For 20 minutes they lay there, pressed against the wood as the entire structure shook and settled. Aftershocks rippling through hundreds of tons of timber. One wrong move, one loss of grip, and they'd slide into the chaos of splintering wood and collapsing platforms below. 20 minutes. Imagine that. The longest 20 minutes of their lives, every muscle locked, every breath a prayer, knowing that the shaking could dislodge something above them, send a branch the size of a telephone pole crashing down onto their heads. They survived, barely, climbed down shaking, probably needing to change their pants. Went back to work the next day because what choice did they have? Bills don't stop. Hunger doesn't stop. The misery whip doesn't care about your trauma. This was your reality. Every single day carried the possibility of death. Not the abstract possibility that we all live with. Real, immediate, violently physical death. You could see it in the frayed cables, feel it in the wobble of your springboard, hear it in the crack of wood that might be the tree falling, or might be the branch above you letting go. And the psychological weight of that. The constant tension, it ground men down faster than the physical labor. Some developed what we'd now call PTSD, couldn't sleep, jumped at sudden sounds. Drank themselves into oblivion when they finally got to town. Others became fatalistic. Reckless, figured if death was coming anyway, might as well take risks, work faster, push harder. These men usually didn't last long. But you couldn't quit. Because 11 hours a day, 6 days a week, even at poverty wages, was still better than starving. Was still better than the factories back east, where you'd breathe cotton dust until your lungs turned to stone. Was still better than the coal mines where cave-ins were daily occurrences. So you picked up that misery whip. You climbed that springboard. You pulled and pulled and pulled until your hands bled and your vision blurred and your partner was screaming at you through the wood because you'd lost the rhythm for the 1,000th time. And you did it all while knowing that the tree you were killing, the ancient giant you were destroying, was barely worth the effort. That the company would likely go bankrupt. That your sacrifice meant almost nothing in the grand economic scheme. But there was one more element to this torture we haven't fully explored yet. The thing that separated the 8-hour cruise from the 13-day cruise. The dark alchemy of speed and suffering that made some teams legendary and others laughingstocks. The rhythm of hell itself. So here's the mystery we started with. 9 days in 1875, 13 days in 1892, 8 hours by the early 1900s. How did the impossible become routine? The answer isn't what you think. It's not better tools. The misery whip didn't evolve. It's not strong or men. Human muscle doesn't change that dramatically in 25 years. And it's certainly not easier trees, sequoias or sequoias. The answer is darker, more desperate. It's what happens when men learn to break themselves efficiently. Let's start with the variables. Not every sequoia takes the same time to fell. Obviously, a tree 6 feet in diameter falls faster than one 8 feet across. But diameter is just the beginning. The quality of the wood matters. Some sequoias are dense, their heartwood compressed by millennia of growth. Others have rot, disease, softer patches that the saw bites through faster. You don't know which you're getting until you're already committed, already standing on your springboard with hours of work ahead. The height of your cut matters. Remember those springboards? Cut at 15 feet up, and you're working with a narrower diameter, faster sawing, but you're also higher, more exposed, more likely to die if something goes wrong. It's a calculated risk every time. The season matters. Winter in the Sierra Nevada. Snow on the ground. When the tree finally falls, it doesn't hit bare earth and shatter. It hits a cushion of snow, less destruction, more salvageable wood. The company makes more money. You might get a small bonus. Might. But here's the real secret. The thing that separated 8-hour teams from everyone else. Synchronization. Not just good synchronization, perfect synchronization. The kind that erases the boundary between two separate humans and turns them into a single organism with one purpose. Pull. The best teams didn't talk. Couldn't talk, not up on those springboards with wind and distance between them. They felt each other through the saw. Every pull transmitted information. Your partner is tiring. Speed up to compensate. Your partner hit a hard patch. Ease off slightly so he can power through. The rhythm stutters. Adjust instantly or the blade binds and you've wasted 30 seconds unbinding it. 30 seconds doesn't sound like much. But multiply it by 100 mistakes, by 1,000. Suddenly your 8-hour tree becomes a 12-hour tree. Your 12-hour tree becomes 2 days. The rhythm is everything, and maintaining that rhythm breaks you in ways you can't prepare for. Hour 1, you're fresh, strong. The saw moves smoothly. You and your partner are in sync. This might actually be the day you set a record. Hour 3, the first doubts creep in. Your forearms are burning. The calluses on your palms, thick as leather from months of this work, are starting to feel the heat. But you push through. Everyone hits the wall at hour 3. Hour 5, you're in hell. Every pull is agony. Your shoulders feel like they're tearing from your body. Your back is a column of fire. You can't feel your hands anymore, which is almost a mercy. And the worst part? You're only halfway done. Maybe. You look at your partner across the massive trunk. You can barely see him, but you know he's feeling the same thing. The saw tells you his pulls are getting shorter, less forceful. He's weakening too. This is where partnerships die. This is where the misery whip earns its name. Because you have a choice in hour 5. You can maintain the rhythm. Push through the pain. Trust that your partner will do the same. Or you can start cheating. Start pushing slightly instead of pulling. Shift your weight wrong so your partner has to work harder. Tiny betrayals. Unconscious at first, then deliberate. Your partner feels it. Of course he does. The saw doesn't lie. And now he's got a decision to make. Keep pulling honestly while you slack off. Or start cheating too. Create an arms race of betrayal until the whole operation falls apart. The best teams, the 8-hour teams, had something rare. Not just strength. Not just skill. They had trust. Absolute, unshakable trust. The kind forged over months of synchronized suffering. They knew their partner wouldn't quit, wouldn't cheat, would pull until his muscles tore rather than break the rhythm. And that trust created a feedback loop. You pull harder because you know he's pulling hard. He pulls harder because he feels your commitment. The rhythm tightens. The saw moves faster. Pain becomes irrelevant because you're locked into something bigger than individual suffering. Hour 7. You're beyond exhausted. You've entered a trance state. The world narrows to the saw, the rhythm, the pull. Your mind disconnects from your body. You're not thinking anymore. You're just moving. Pull, pull, pull. The tree is almost through. You can feel it in the resistance, in the way the saw suddenly bites a little deeper. But here's the cruelty. Hour 7 is when accidents happen. When fatigue makes you careless. When you forget to check your footing on the springboard. When your partner, equally exhausted, makes a mistake that kills you both. The saw slips, or a knot in the wood grabs the blade, or the tree shifts unexpectedly, still hours from falling but already unstable. Men have been thrown from springboards in hour 7, have had the saw kick back and slice open their leg, have simply collapsed from exhaustion and tumbled into the void. The 13-day teams, they didn't have the trust, didn't have the synchronization. They fought the saw and each other for almost 2 weeks, making incremental progress through a haze of resentment and pain. By the end, they hated that tree, hated their partner, hated themselves. But they got paid the same as the 8-hour teams. That's the joke. Speed meant nothing to your wages, only to your pride, only to the knowledge that you were among the elite. The few who could break themselves efficiently enough to achieve the impossible. And what did that achievement look like in the moment of triumph? What happened when the saw finally cut through and 3,000 years of vertical existence prepared to end? Let's find out. You feel it before you hear it. A change in resistance. The saw suddenly pulls easier, gliding through the last inches of heartwood. Your partner feels it too. Across the massive diameter of the trunk, you catch a glimpse of his face. He knows. The tree is about to fall. Everything happens faster than your exhausted brain can process. Someone shouts. Maybe you, maybe your partner, maybe the foreman on the ground who's been watching, waiting, calculating the trajectory. The command cuts through the mountain air. She's going, clear out. But you can't just jump off your springboard. You're 20 feet up, remember? You have to climb down. Fast, faster than you've ever moved after 8 hours of sawing. Your legs are rubber. Your hands can barely grip the trunk, but adrenaline is a hell of a drug. You scramble down, boots slipping on bark, splinters driving into your palms. Your partner is doing the same on the opposite side. The saw is still embedded in the cut, forgotten now. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters except getting clear. The tree begins to lean, slowly at first, gravity testing its grip. 3,000 years of standing, and now the slightest tilt. The foreman calculated the fall line, or thinks he did. Sequoias are supposed to fall predictable, following the angle of the cut. Supposed to. But these are living organisms, not mathematics. Internal rot. Uneven weight distribution. Wind gusts at the worst possible moment. A sequoia can twist as it falls, can split vertically, can do things that physics textbooks say shouldn't be possible with a cylindrical object. The crack starts somewhere deep inside, a sound like a cannon shot echoing through the forest, then another, the internal structure failing catastrophically. Wood that's been under compression for millennia, suddenly releasing all that stored energy. You're running now. Everyone is running. Away from the fall line, away from the kill zone, into whatever cover you can find. Behind other trees, behind boulders. Some men just hit the ground and cover their heads, praying to whatever god might listen to loggers. The lean accelerates. The crown of the tree, 100 feet above the cut, begins its arc toward earth. Branches that weigh more than horses start to move. Faster, faster. The sound is beyond description. It's not one sound. It's a symphony of destruction. The trunk, tearing from the stump. Air screaming through branches, smaller trees in the path splintering like matchsticks. The earth itself seems to hold its breath, and then impact. The ground shakes, actually shakes, like an earthquake. Men are knocked off their feet 100 yards away. A wall of air and debris explodes outward from the impact site. Dust, bark, wood chips, entire branches launched like artillery shells. The tree doesn't land. It detonates. Remember what we said about sequoia wood being brittle? This is where that nightmare becomes real. The trunk hits the earth, and the shock wave travels through 200 tons of ancient timber in a fraction of a second. The wood can't absorb that energy. It shatters. Chunks the size of men fly through the air. The trunk splits lengthwise, massive slabs peeling away, like the tree is being unzipped. Splinters as long as spears embed themselves in surrounding trees. The The sound is like standing next to a controlled demolition, except there's nothing controlled about this. The dust cloud rises 50 feet in the air. For a moment, you can't see anything. Can't breathe without choking on wood particles. Your ears are ringing from the impact. You're checking yourself for injuries you might not feel yet from the adrenaline. And then, slowly, the dust settles. The debris stops falling. The forest goes quiet except for the creak of settling wood and the ragged breathing of men who just cheated death one more time. You walk toward the fallen giant. Carefully, because even now it's dangerous. Tension in the shattered wood can send pieces flying hours after the fall. The trunk might roll, branches might break loose, but you need to assess the damage, need to know if 8 hours of hell was worth it. And that's when your heart sinks. The tree is destroyed. Not damaged. Destroyed. The impact has split it into sections. The beautiful, clear heartwood you hope to salvage is fractured into thousands of pieces. Where you expected straight lumber, you see chaos. Shattered ends. Compression damage running the length of every major piece. You start doing the math in your head. 50% loss, maybe more. All that work. All that pain. And half the tree is firewood before you've made a single lumber cut. The foreman is already there, walking the length of the fallen trunk, shaking his head. He's seen this before. They've all seen it before. But every time there's that tiny hope that maybe, just maybe, this tree will be different. It never is. Behind you, your partner sits down heavily on a stump. He doesn't say anything, doesn't need to. You both know what comes next. The real work, breaking down what's left, hauling it to the mill, watching as the accountants calculate whether this giant will push the company closer to profit or bankruptcy. But for just a moment, you both stare at what you've done. A living thing that was ancient when Jesus walked the earth, now reduced to rubble, killed in 8 hours by 2 men with a saw and more determination than sense. Was it worth it? Is it ever worth it? The answer is coming. And you're not going to like it. Let's do the final accounting. The brutal, honest math of what just happened. You worked 8 hours. Let's be generous and say you're getting $2 for the day. Your partner, same, $4 total in wages. The saw costs $50 new, needs to be replaced every few months. The springboards, the axes, the files for sharpening, the infrastructure to transport the log out of the forest. Add it up and the company has invested hundreds of dollars before a single board is cut. Now look at what's lying on the ground. A mountain of wreckage. A tree that contained maybe 40,000 board feet of potential lumber. Emphasis on potential. Because of that potential, you'll be lucky to salvage 6,000 usable feet. The rest, shattered. Splintered. Compression damaged beyond repair. And those 6,000 feet, they're not going to become fine furniture, not even house framing. Sequoia lumber is soft, brittle, prone to splitting. It's good for exactly 3 things: shingles, fence posts, and grape stakes. Shingles, for roofs. The ancient cathedral of the forest, reduced to something you nail over plywood and forget about. But wait, it gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. This tree you just killed, it was in Converse Basin. You're working for the Hume Bennett Lumber Company. And over the next 10 years, your company and crews like yours will fell 8,000 giant sequoias from this one basin. 8,000 trees, some of them 4,000 years old, predating the pyramids. A historian will later visit this site and call it the greatest orgy of destructive lumbering in the history of the world. Not exaggeration, cold fact. Nowhere else on Earth did humans destroy so much ancient life so quickly for so little return. The company will extract maybe 30 million board feet of usable lumber from those 8,000 giants. Sounds impressive until you realize that's the equivalent of maybe 2,000 modern houses. 2,000 houses from 8,000 trees that had been growing since before human civilization. And the profit margin? Razor thin. Some years negative. Hume Bennett will eventually sell out, their investors barely recovering their initial capital. The big logging companies that went after sequoias? Most of them failed. Went bankrupt, walked away from millions of dollars in infrastructure, leaving ghost towns and abandoned rail lines scattered through the Sierra Nevada. The only winners: the scavengers, the small operators who bought up the wreckage for pennies on the dollar. They're the ones who turned your 8 hours of hell into fence posts. They're the ones who took a tree older than Rome and made grape steaks out of it. Grape steaks. Think about that. Think about what that means. Somewhere in California's Central Valley, there's a vineyard. Rows of grapevines stretching to the horizon. And holding up those vines, keeping them organized and productive, are stakes cut from giant sequoias. A 3,000-year-old tree, reduced to a support role for plants that live maybe 50 years. The shingles are even worse. They're durable, sure. Sequoia heartwood resists rot. Those shingles might last 100 years on someone's roof, but they're invisible. Anonymous. No one looks at their roof shingles and thinks about the ancient forest they came from. No one tells their children, those shingles used to be a living giant. The memory dies. The tree dies. And nobody gets rich. But here's the really twisted part. Some of these trees weren't even cut for profit. They were cut for spectacle, for pride, for the chance to prove to the world that Americans could conquer nature itself. Remember the General Noble tree? The one where workers clung to the stump for 20 minutes during the fall. That tree wasn't destined for lumber. It was cut, sectioned, and shipped to Chicago for the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. People stood inside a hollowed section and took photographs, marveled at the size, and many of them, most of them, refused to believe it was real. They thought it was a hoax, an elaborate construction, because their minds couldn't accept that a tree could grow that large. So the company killed a 3,000-year-old giant, spent a fortune transporting it across the country, and the public's reaction was, nice fake tree. The irony is thick enough to cut with a misery whip. And the human cost? We've talked about the danger, the exhaustion, the poverty wages. But we haven't talked about the totality of what was lost. By 1900, a third of all old-growth giant sequoias had been destroyed. By the 1920s, almost all the ancient groves were gone. What took nature 4,000 years to grow, humanity erased in 50. The survivors, the trees we can visit today, in places like Sequoia National Park, exist only because a few conservationists fought desperate political battles to protect them. John Muir, Teddy Roosevelt. Men who saw what was happening and screamed into the void until someone finally listened. But they were too late to save most of it. Too late for Converse Basin, now called the greatest sequoia cemetery in the world. Too late for thousands of groves that exist now only as fields of massive stumps, silent monuments to trees that will never grow again. You can visit these stumps today. Stand on them. Some are so wide that people have built cabins on top of them, used them as dance floors. The Centennial Stump in Grant Grove, cut in 1875 for the Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition, is still there, still visible. A platform 30 feet across, the exposed rings telling a story that begins before Christ was born. And for what? For grape steaks and roof shingles, for museum exhibits that people thought were fake, for lumber companies that went bankrupt, for workers who destroyed their bodies and barely survived. The forest is quieter now. The giants are mostly gone, and the few that remain stand as evidence of what we lost, what we destroyed, what we can never, ever get back. Was it worth it? The 8 hours of agony, the lives lost, the friendships destroyed by the misery whip, the ancient silence shattered for profit that never materialized. You tell me, because I can't find an answer that doesn't taste like ash. There's a stump in Kings Canyon National Park. It's called the Centennial Stump, cut in 1875, shipped piece by piece to the Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition. They wanted to show the world what America had, what we could do, what we could conquer. The exhibition ended. The sections were discarded, lost to history, but the stump remains. Over 150 years later, it's still there in Grant Grove, 30 feet across. The growth rings clearly visible, each one a year in a life that spanned millennia. Tourists stand on it now. Take photos. Kids run across its surface like it's a natural stage. And maybe that's fitting. Maybe the only purpose left for this giant is to be a platform for brief human moments. Moments that will be forgotten long before that stump finally decomposes. The World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, 1893. The General Noble tree, or what was left of it, stood in the forestry building. People walked through the hollow section, touched the wood, read the placard explaining what it was, where it came from, how old it had been. And they didn't believe it. The most common reaction wasn't awe, it was skepticism. This has to be fake. Trees don't grow this big. This is American exaggeration, propaganda. Imagine that. You risk your life cutting down a 4,000-year-old tree. You ship it thousands of miles. Display it for the world to see. And the world calls you a liar. That section of the General Noble tree, by the way, is gone now. Lost, destroyed, discarded when the exhibition ended. So even the spectacle was temporary. Even the proof of what we destroyed has been destroyed. But if you visit Sequoia National Park today, you can still see what's left of the ancient groves. And I need you to understand what you're looking at. Because it's not what was. It's the remnants, the survivors, the trees that got lucky. Walk through the giant forest. Stand beneath the General Sherman tree, the largest living organism on Earth. Feel the scale, the age, the impossible grandeur of it. And then understand this, it's alone. Where it stands, there should be hundreds more just like it, thousands. An entire forest of giants so dense that early explorers said the canopy blocked out the sun even at noon. Most of them are gone. The forest floor is dotted with massive logs slowly decaying. Fallen centuries ago, or cut 100 years back. They're still there because sequoia wood doesn't rot quickly. Walk past a log 20 feet in diameter, a tunnel carved through it by time and weather, and realize that's what's left. That's the graveyard. Converse Basin is worse. It's called the world's largest sequoia cemetery for a reason. The stumps stretch in every direction. Some still show the notches where springboards were inserted. Some have new growth sprouting from them, young sequoias trying desperately to reclaim what was lost. But they'll need another 3,000 years to reach the size of their parents. 3,000 years. We don't think in those timescales anymore. We can barely think past next quarter's profits. There are photographs from the logging era. Black and white images of men standing on stumps, 30 or 40 of them crowded onto a single cross-section of tree. Grinning for the camera. Proud of what they've accomplished. They have no idea what they've destroyed. How could they? The scale is too vast. The loss too permanent. And the cruelest irony? The wood they harvested. The lumber they died extracting. It's mostly gone too. Those shingles rotted eventually. Those fence posts split and were replaced. The grape stakes broke and got thrown away. When the houses built from sequoia lumber have been demolished and rebuilt with modern materials. Nothing remains but the stumps and the absence. So when you visit Sequoia National Park, when you stand beneath the General Sherman tree and feel small and insignificant, remember this: you're looking at a refugee, a survivor of a Holocaust that consumed 95% of its kind. That tree should have neighbors, should be surrounded by equals, should be part of an ecosystem so vast and ancient that human timescales become meaningless in comparison. But it stands alone, and the silence around it. That's not peaceful. That's the silence of extinction, the quiet that comes after the chainsaws stop because there's nothing left to cut. The misery whip is gone too, replaced by chainsaws in the 1920s, which made the work faster, easier, and somehow even more destructive. The men who pulled those saws for 8 hours straight, they're all dead now. No monuments, no memorials, just faded photographs and occasional mentions in logging history books. Their suffering bought us grape stakes and roof shingles, temporary products from permanent trees. A trade so catastrophically unbalanced that future generations will struggle to understand how we thought it made sense. But here's the question that keeps me up at night. The question I can't answer. The one that maybe you can. Was it worth it? Not economically. We know it wasn't. The companies failed. The profit never materialized. But was it worth it on some other level? Did we learn something? Did we gain something intangible that justifies the cost? Or did we just prove that humans will destroy anything, no matter how ancient, how irreplaceable, how magnificent? If we think there's money in it, even when there isn't, the stumps don't answer. They just sit there in the forest, silent witnesses to a crime we can never undo. And the few remaining giants, they keep growing, keep adding rings, keep surviving, for now.